Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that at 6:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 3rd, 2026, Donald Trump placed a single phone call to Prime Minister Mark Carney that may determine whether the longest undefended border in the world becomes the newest front line of economic warfare? And ask yourself this, when a man who built his reputation on never backing down finds himself facing the potential collapse of the most integrated bilateral economy in human history. What price is he willing to pay to avoid becoming the president who lost Canada? The call lasted exactly 23 minutes. There were no intermediaries, no diplomatic protocol, and no prepared statements. Just two men who understand leverage and power engaged in what sources describe as the most consequential conversation in North American history since NAFTA. What emerged was not surrender from either side, but the most audacious last-chance proposal ever presented between allied nations. Trump's offer, which arrived at the Prime Minister's office in a comprehensive document just 4 hours later, represents a complete reversal of every demand he has made over the past year. Gone are the threats to make Canada the 51st state. Absent are the ultimatums for American control over Canadian resources. Instead, what we see is a desperate recognition that Canada's economic decoupling has fundamentally altered the balance of power in North America. The document, which senior government sources have confirmed is authentic, begins with an unprecedented acknowledgement. The United States recognizes that the economic integration model that has served both nations for the past 3 decades requires fundamental restructuring to reflect the reality of Canadian strategic autonomy. These are not the words of a superpower dictating terms to a junior partner. These are the words of a nation scrambling to prevent the collapse of the economic relationship that underpins American prosperity. To understand the magnitude of what Trump is now offering, we must examine how completely Canada's diversification strategy has shifted the negotiating dynamics. When Trump began his economic pressure campaign in early 2025, conventional wisdom said Canada would capitulate because we had no alternative to the American market. That calculation was catastrophically wrong. The data from late January 2026 tells the story of the most rapid economic reorientation in modern history. Canadian exports to Asia increased 127% in Q4 2025. European purchases rose 89%. Meanwhile, Canadian exports to the United States fell 31%, the steepest decline since the Great Depression. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Canada has not just found new customers, we have fundamentally restructured our economic model to prioritize value-added processing over raw material exports. Lithium, once shipped raw to China, is now refined in Quebec. Lumber once sent south is processed in BC for Japanese markets. This transformation occurred with stunning speed because the Carney government was implementing a comprehensive strategy developed since 2024. The $890 billion sovereignty infrastructure program was not a reaction to American threats, but proactive recognition that Canadian economic dependence was ending. The infrastructure investments created irreversible changes. Churchill Port expansion increased cargo capacity by 340%. The Hudson Bay Railway upgrade reduced transportation costs by 23%. The Arctic Fiber Network cut data transmission latency to Asian markets by 67 milliseconds, worth billions in high-frequency trading. These investments attracted massive capital flows. European pension funds committed $127 billion to Canadian projects. Japanese manufacturers announced $43 billion in production relocations. Chinese funds increased holdings by $89 billion, viewing Canada as a stable bridge between East and West. The psychological impact on American policymakers cannot be overstated. For the first time in living memory, the U.S. is watching a democratic ally successfully reduce economic dependence on American markets without suffering collapse. The Canadian model is being studied by other middle powers as a template for reducing vulnerability to great power coercion. The timing of Trump's final offer reflects the harsh reality that his original strategy of economic pressure has not just failed, it has backfired spectacularly. The latest comprehensive polling data from swing states shows that American voters are beginning to blame the Trump administration for the economic disruption caused by loss of integrated supply chains with Canada. Gas prices in the Midwest have increased by an average of 0.47 per gallon due to major disruption of Canadian energy supplies. Food prices have risen by 12% in border states that previously relied heavily on Canadian agricultural imports. The political pressure on Trump has been intensified by a revolt within his own party. Republican governors from border states have begun to publicly criticizing the administration's Canada policy. Montana Governor Greg Gianforte warned that losing our Canadian trading relationship would be an economic disaster for my state. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum announced that his state would pursue bilateral economic cooperation with Canadian provinces, regardless of federal policy. Even traditionally loyal Republican senators like John Barrasso of Wyoming have expressed concern about the impact of trade warfare on their agricultural constituencies. The business community pressure has been even more intense. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a study projecting that the complete breakdown of Canada-U.S. economic integration would cost the American economy $1.7 trillion over 5 years and eliminate 3.4 million American jobs. The National Association of Manufacturers warned that American industrial competitiveness would be permanently damaged by the loss of integrated North American supply chains. The American Farm Bureau Federation projected that agricultural exports would decline by $67 billion annually without preferential access to Canadian markets. It is against this background of mounting economic and political pressure that we must understand Trump's remarkable offer to Canada. The proposal, which government sources describe as comprehensive beyond anything previously contemplated, represents a complete abandonment of American attempts to subordinate Canadian sovereignty in exchange for a partnership model that acknowledges Canadian economic independence while preserving mutually beneficial integration. The first component of Trump's offer addresses the issue that has been at the heart of the bilateral crisis: resource sovereignty. Rather than demanding American control over Canadian natural resources, Trump's proposal offers a strategic resource partnership that would guarantee American access to Canadian energy, critical minerals, and agricultural products through long-term contracts negotiated on commercial terms rather than imposed through political pressure. Under this proposal, the United States would commit to purchasing a minimum of $340 billion worth of Canadian energy over the next decade, at prices determined by market mechanisms rather than political negotiations. American companies would receive preferential access to Canadian critical mineral supplies, but only through competitive bidding processes that respect Canadian environmental and labor standards. Most significantly, the proposal explicitly acknowledges Canadian sovereignty over freshwater resources and commits the United States to supporting Canadian positions on water management in international forums. The second component addresses trade and economic integration in ways that reflect the new reality of Canadian diversification. Rather than insisting on exclusive American access to Canadian markets, Trump's proposal offers a North American economic partnership that would facilitate Canadian trade with global markets while maintaining preferential access for American goods and services. The proposal includes American support for Canadian infrastructure projects that enhance our ability to reach global markets, including a $67 billion American investment in the Churchill Port expansion and Arctic shipping routes. The United States would provide technical assistance and financing for Canadian processing facilities that add value to raw materials before export, recognizing that value-added Canadian exports benefit American equipment suppliers and service providers. Most remarkably, the proposal offers American support for Canadian efforts to diversify trade relationships with Asia and Europe. Rather than viewing Canadian economic diversification as a threat to American interests, Trump's offer acknowledges that a prosperous, globally integrated Canada serves American strategic interests better than an economically dependent client state. The third component of the proposal addresses defense and security cooperation in ways that respect Canadian sovereignty while acknowledging shared continental security interests. The proposal offers a Continental Security partnership that would modernize NORAD and expand bilateral defense cooperation while explicitly recognizing Canadian independence in defense procurement and international peacekeeping commitments. Under this framework, the United States would increase its investment in continental air defense systems by $127 billion over 7 years, with Canadian industries receiving guaranteed participation in design, manufacturing, and maintenance contracts. The proposal offers Canadian companies preferential access to American defense markets worth an estimated $234 billion over the next decade, transforming the bilateral defense relationship from one of dependence to one of industrial partnership. The proposal also addresses one of Canada's most sensitive concerns about American defense cooperation: sovereignty over the Arctic. Rather than demanding American control over Canadian Arctic territories, Trump's offer proposes a joint Arctic stewardship initiative that would combine American financial resources with Canadian territorial authority to develop Arctic infrastructure, environmental monitoring, and resource management capabilities. I want to pause here because the implications of this offer extend far beyond the immediate bilateral relationship. Do you think Trump's reversal represents a genuine recognition of Canadian sovereignty? Or is this a tactical retreat designed to prevent further deterioration of American influence in North America? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because understanding Trump's true motivations will determine how Canada should respond to this unprecedented proposal. The fourth component of Trump's proposal addresses the regulatory and standards harmonization issues that have been a source of tension throughout the bilateral crisis. Rather than demanding that Canada adopt American standards, the proposal offers mutual recognition and regulatory cooperation that would allow both countries to maintain their distinct regulatory approaches while facilitating trade through technical cooperation and mutual recognition agreements. This represents a fundamental shift from the subordination model that characterized previous American approaches to regulatory integration. Under Trump's proposal, Canadian environmental standards, labor protections, and consumer safety regulations would be recognized as equivalent to American standards for trade purposes, eliminating the regulatory barriers that have hindered bilateral commerce without forcing Canada to abandon its regulatory sovereignty. The proposal also offers American technical assistance and financial support for Canadian efforts to develop international standards that reflect Canadian values and priorities. This could position Canada as a leader in global standards development rather than a passive recipient of American regulatory preferences. The economic implications of Trump's offer are staggering in their scope and ambition. The total value of American commitments outlined in the proposal exceeds $890 billion over the next decade, making it the largest bilateral economic agreement between democratic nations since the Marshall Plan. The proposal would create an estimated 780,000 jobs in Canada and 1.2 million jobs in the United States through increased economic integration that respects rather than threatens Canadian sovereignty. The proposal also offers solutions to some of the most pressing challenges facing both economies. American investment in Canadian clean energy infrastructure would accelerate the development of renewable energy sources that could supply both countries, while reducing dependence on fossil fuel imports from unstable regions. Canadian processing of American raw materials would reduce supply chain vulnerabilities while creating value-added employment in both countries. The technology cooperation components of the proposal could position North America as a leader in the industries that will define the 21st century economy. Joint Canadian-American investment in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and advanced manufacturing could create competitive advantages that benefit both countries, while reducing dependence on authoritarian suppliers. The political implications of Trump's offer may be even more significant than the economic benefits. If accepted, the proposal would demonstrate that democratic nations can restructure their relationships to reflect changing power dynamics without resorting to economic warfare or political subordination. The model of sovereign partnership outlined in Trump's proposal could serve as a template for other democratic alliances facing pressure from authoritarian powers or internal tensions. However, the proposal also presents significant risks and challenges for Canadian decision-makers. The 48-hour deadline that Trump has imposed creates enormous pressure for a rapid decision on issues that will affect Canadian sovereignty for generations. The complexity of the proposal makes it difficult to fully assess the implications of acceptance or rejection within such a compressed timeframe. The political dynamics within Canada add another layer of complexity to the decision-making process. The Carney government has built its political credibility on standing up to American pressure and defending Canadian sovereignty. Accepting Trump's offer, even with the sovereignty protections it contains, could be portrayed by political opponents as capitulation to American demands. The provincial governments present another challenge. Many of the commitments outlined in Trump's proposal would require provincial cooperation or approval, particularly in areas like natural resource management, environmental regulation, and infrastructure development. Premier Doug Ford of Ontario has already expressed skepticism about any agreement that locks Ontario into long-term commitments to American companies. Premier François Legault of Quebec has warned that any deal must respect Quebec's jurisdiction over hydroelectric resources and cultural policies. The Indigenous communities whose territories would be affected by many of the infrastructure projects outlined in Trump's proposal represent another crucial constituency that must be consulted. The Assembly of First Nations has demanded that any agreement include binding commitments to Indigenous sovereignty and environmental protection that go beyond the general principles outlined in Trump's proposal. The international implications of Canada's response to Trump's offer extend far beyond North America. European allies are closely watching to see whether Canada will accept a bilateral arrangement that could reduce Canadian commitment to transatlantic partnerships. Asian partners who have invested heavily in Canadian diversification projects are concerned that renewed American integration could marginalize their access to Canadian markets and resources. The Chinese government has already issued a statement expressing concern about any Canada-US agreement that would restrict Chinese investment in Canadian strategic industries. Russian officials have warned that increased North American defense cooperation could destabilize Arctic security arrangements. Even friendly nations like the United Kingdom and Australia are concerned about the precedent that a comprehensive Canada-US partnership might set for their own relationships with American power. The timeline for response adds urgency to all these considerations. Trump's 48-hour deadline expires at 6:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 5th, 2026. The compressed timeframe prevents the kind of extensive consultation and analysis that would normally accompany such a momentous decision. It forces Canadian leaders to make a choice based on incomplete information and under enormous pressure. The consequences of rejection are potentially severe. Trump has made it clear that this is his final offer. and that rejection would result in the complete termination of preferential trade arrangements between the two countries. The economic disruption would be immediate and severe, particularly for Canadian industries that have not yet completed their diversification strategies. However, the consequences of acceptance may be equally significant. Committing Canada to a comprehensive partnership with the United States at this moment could limit our flexibility to respond to changing global circumstances or take advantage of opportunities that may emerge from our successful diversification strategy. The business community response to Trump's offer has been mixed, but generally positive. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has endorsed the proposal as a historic opportunity to secure Canadian prosperity while maintaining our sovereignty. The Business Council of Canada has praised the offer as recognition of Canada's new position as an equal partner rather than a junior ally. However, some business leaders have expressed concern about the long-term implications of renewed integration with the United States. The Canadian manufacturers who have invested heavily in developing European and Asian markets worry that American preferences could limit their global expansion. Resource companies that have diversified their customer base are concerned about returning to dependence on American buyers. The labor movement response has been cautiously supportive, with unions recognizing the job creation potential of the infrastructure investments while insisting on strong labor protections and environmental standards. The Canadian Labour Congress has demanded binding commitments to worker rights and environmental protection that go beyond the general principles outlined in Trump-biased proposal. Environmental groups have been more critical, expressing concern about the potential for increased resource extraction and industrial development. Greenpeace Canada has warned that acceptance of Trump's offer could lock Canada into fossil fuel dependency for decades. The David Suzuki Foundation has called for environmental impact assessments of all proposed infrastructure projects before any agreement is finalized. If you're finding this analysis of the most critical decision in Canadian history valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to provide in-depth coverage of the events that will determine our nation's future for generations to come. The public opinion polling on Trump's offer reflects the complexity of the choice facing Canadian decision-makers. An Angus Reid poll released this morning shows that 47% of Canadians support accepting the proposal, 39% oppose it, and 14% remain undecided. The regional breakdown reveals significant differences in opinion, with Atlantic Canadians strongly supporting acceptance while Quebec voters are more skeptical. The generational divide in public opinion is particularly striking. Canadians over 55, who remember the economic benefits of close Canada-US integration, support acceptance by a margin of 58% to 34%. Canadians under 35, who have witnessed the successful diversification strategy of the past 2 years, oppose acceptance by a margin of 51% to 41%. The political implications of public opinion polling create additional pressure on government decision-makers. The Conservative Party has criticized the government for allowing the relationship with the United States to deteriorate to this point, while stopping short of explicitly endorsing Trump and his offer. The New Democratic Party has warned against selling out Canadian sovereignty for short-term economic gains. The Bloc Québécois has demanded that any agreement include specific protections for Quebec's distinct society and provincial jurisdiction. As we approach the 48-hour deadline, the decision facing Prime Minister Carney represents more than just an economic choice. It is a choice about the kind of nation Canada wants to be in the 21st century. Do we accept a partnership that offers immediate economic benefits, but potentially limits our long-term flexibility? Or do we reject the offer and continue with the diversification strategy that has proven successful but involves significant short-term costs and uncertainties? The historical precedents for such a momentous decision are limited. The negotiation of Confederation in 1867, the decision to enter World War I in 1914, the repatriation of the Constitution in 1982, all represent moments when Canadian leaders made choices that defined our national character for generations. The decision on Trump's final offer belongs in that category of choices that will be remembered for decades as a defining moment in Canadian history. Whatever decision is made in the next 24 hours will reflect not just economic calculations or political considerations, but fundamental judgments about Canadian values, capabilities, and aspirations. It will determine whether we continue on the path of strategic autonomy that has characterized the Carney era, or return to a model of integration that emphasizes partnership over independence. The clock is ticking towards 6:42 p.m. on February 5th, 2026. In less than 24 hours, we will know whether the longest undefended border in the world will remain a symbol of peaceful cooperation between democratic allies or become something unprecedented in modern history, A boundary between a global superpower and a middle power that chose independence over integration. The answer will define not just the future of Canada, but the future of democratic cooperation in an era of great power competition and economic nationalism. The world is watching, and history is waiting. Thank you.